The smell hits you first: burning magnesium, hot oil, and something sweet underneath that nobody talked about. Wright R-3350 engines ran so hot they glowed cherry red at cruise power, and when one let go, which happened often, the nacelle fire burned through the wing spar in 90 seconds. The crew had about that long to bail out or ride it down. The B-29 Superfortress cost the United States government roughly $3 billion to develop and produce between 1940 and 1946. The Manhattan Project, the one that built the atomic bomb the B-29 carried to Hiroshima, ran about $1.9 billion. The airplane that delivered the weapon cost 60% more than the weapon itself. No other aircraft program in history has matched that ratio. The B-29 remains the most expensive single-weapon system of the Second World War, and most of its early crews would have traded every dollar for engines that didn't catch fire. Boeing's engineers knew what they'd built: a pressurized bomber with a wingspan of 141 feet, remote-controlled gun turrets, a central fire control computer that could coordinate 4 turrets simultaneously, and a service ceiling above 30,000 feet. Higher than any interceptor the Japanese fielded in 1944 could comfortably reach. The airframe represented a full generation's leap over the B-17. The problem lived inside the cowlings. The R-3350 radial engine produced 2,200 horsepower from 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, and Wright Aeronautical had rushed it into production before solving its cooling problems. Rear row cylinders starved for airflow. Exhaust valves cracked, oil pooled in the lower cylinders during startup and ignited. The official Army Air Force's history uses the word unreliable, a generous description for an engine that turned training flights into funerals across Kansas and Nebraska through the winter of 1943 into 44. If this kind of story is why you're here, a like and subscribe keep them coming. And if there's an aircraft or a mission you want the full breakdown on, put it in the comments. I read every one of them. The 20th Air Force lost more B-29s to engine fires and mechanical failure during stateside training than to Japanese fighters during the first 3 months of combat operations from China and the Marianas. The exact numbers remain disputed. Some unit histories count only total losses. Others include aircraft that landed safely after in-flight fires but never flew again. What the maintenance logs do confirm is that engine changes consumed roughly half of all unscheduled depot maintenance hours through early 1945. Crews at bases in Saipan, Tinian, and Guam pulled R-3350s and replaced them at rates that would have grounded any peacetime program. General Hap Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces, had staked his career and his service's independence on the B-29 delivering results from the Pacific. He needed a strategic bomber that could hit Japan from island bases, and no alternative existed. The B-32 Dominator arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. Arnold had 1 airplane, and its engines kept killing his men before the enemy got a chance to. The brass didn't cancel the program. They couldn't afford to, so they flew it broken. 40,000 feet. That number drove every decision Boeing made starting in 1938, 2 years before the Army Air Corps issued its formal requirement. At that altitude, an unprotected human loses consciousness in 15 seconds. Blood boils at the capillaries. No bomber crew could fight, navigate, or drop ordnance in that environment without a pressurized fuselage, and in 1938, no production aircraft in the world had one. The specification that landed on Boeing's desk in February 1940, formally designated R-40B, read like science fiction. The Army wanted a bomber capable of carrying a ton of bombs 2,600 miles at speeds above 400 miles per hour, with defensive armament heavy enough to survive without fighter escort over hostile territory. Every number in that document exceeded what any existing bomber could do by a factor of 2 or more. The B-17, Boeing's own pride, maxed out around 287 miles per hour and operated unpressurized below 28,000 feet. R-40B demanded a different species of airplane. Boeing's chief aerodynamicist, George Scherer, and project engineer Edward Wells understood the central contradiction. Pressurization required a sealed cylindrical fuselage, essentially a tube. Defensive guns required holes in that tube. Every hole bled pressure. The solution Wells devised split the crew compartment into two pressurized sections, connected by a tunnel over the bomb bays, with the gunners firing through sealed blisters using remotely operated turrets controlled by General Electric's analog computing system. The official Boeing Company history calls the fire control system the most complex airborne equipment yet designed for any aircraft. Nobody had built anything like it. Nobody had tested anything like it at altitude. Wells committed Boeing to delivering all of it simultaneously. Pressurization, remote gunnery, tricycle landing gear, enormous wing area, in a prototype that first flew on September 21, 1942, less than 30 months after the specification arrived. The prototype, B-29 No. 1, got airborne from Boeing Field in Seattle, with test pilot Edmund T. Allen at the controls. Allen reported the aircraft handled well. The engines ran hot. He noted overheating on the No. 1 and No. 4 nacelles during climb-out and recommended limiting power settings until Wright solved the cooling problem. Wright never fully solved it. Allen flew the second prototype on December 31, 1942. 2 months later, on February 18, 1943, that aircraft caught fire over Seattle. Allen and his entire crew of 10 died in the crash. Boeing kept building. Colonel Leonard Harmon pulled a Wright R-3350 out of a brand new B-29 at the Pratt, Kansas Modification Center in March 1944 and laid the crankcase open on the hangar floor. Magnesium. The entire crankcase casting, the structural backbone of an engine producing 2,200 horsepower, fabricated from magnesium alloy to save weight. Magnesium ignites at around 873 degrees Fahrenheit. The R-3350's rear row cylinder heads routinely hit 600 during sustained climb. That left a margin of 273 degrees between normal operations and a self-consuming engine fire that no extinguisher on the aircraft could put out. Compare that to the Pratt & Whitney R, two 800 double Wasp powering the B-32, the F-6F Hellcat, the F-4U Corsair. Aluminum crankcase, lower operating temperatures, failure rate in 1944, running roughly one catastrophic failure per 100,000 flight hours. The R-3350's rate, and the records from the Army Air Force's Materiel Command declassified in 1978 confirm this, ran closer to 1 per 1,500 hours during the early production run. The word for that gap is indictment. The name Battle of Kansas sounds like it belongs to the Civil War. It doesn't. General Arnold coined it in early 1944 when he discovered that Boeing's Wichita plant and the modification centers in Marietta, Omaha, and Pratt had produced hundreds of B-29 airframes that couldn't fly combat missions. Engines arrived incomplete. Turret systems lacked wiring harnesses. Propeller governors failed bench tests. Arnold dispatched Brigadier General Bennett Myers to Kansas with authority to commandeer labor from any source and a deadline: 150 combat-ready B-29s by April 15, 1944. Myers got them. Mechanics worked outdoors in Kansas wind chill, bare hands on frozen aluminum. They pulled engines, rewired turrets, replaced exhaust collectors, and hand-fitted cowl flaps that Boeing's rushed production line had stamped to incorrect tolerances. A 1944 AAF inspection report noted that some aircraft required over 400 individual modifications before acceptance. 400 on supposedly finished bombers, rolling off a production line that cost taxpayers $600,000 per airframe. The April deadline held. 150 B-29s reached combat-ready status and began flowing to India and China for XX Bomber Command. Their engines still overheated. Crews learned to manage the R-3350 the way you'd manage a bad horse, gentle on the throttles during climb, cowl flaps wide open past 10,000 feet, mixture adjustments every few minutes to keep cylinder head temps below the red line. Some pilots kept one hand on the feathering switches through entire missions. Staff Sergeant Francis Duarte, flight engineer on a B-29 out of Chengdu, logged 47 in-flight engine shutdowns across 19 missions between June and October 1944. 47. He noted each one in pencil in a pocket notebook that survives in the National Air and Space Museum archives. The last entry reads simply, "Number 4 again. What do you do with a $3 billion bomber that can't hit anything?" Curtis LeMay had the answer by January 1945, and it horrified his staff. High-altitude precision bombing over Japan had failed. The jet stream above 25,000 feet scattered bombs across miles of empty ground. LeMay's 21st Bomber Command, operating from the Marianas, managed to destroy less than 1% of target area in the first 3 months of operations. The 20th Air Force's own assessment called the campaign ineffective. LeMay ordered his B-29 stripped. The guns went first, upper turrets, lower turrets, tail guns on most aircraft, then the gunners, then most of the ammunition. He cut crew size from 11 to 7 or 8. Then, he told his pilots they'd fly at night, between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, in a loose stream over Tokyo, carrying incendiary clusters instead of high explosives. The fuel savings from lower altitude and reduced weight meant each aircraft could carry roughly 7 tons of E-46 incendiary bundles, more than double the standard high-altitude bomb load. A 1945 Strategic Bombing Survey notation describes the tactical shift as unprecedented in the history of heavy bombardment. Their phrasing, not mine. His crews thought he'd lost his mind. Unarmed B-29s at 5,000 feet over a city defended by 1,200 anti-aircraft guns and a night fighter force that had already proven it could find bombers in the dark. LeMay calculated, correctly, that Japanese anti-aircraft radar and fire control couldn't track low-altitude targets effectively, that the night fighters lacked airborne intercept radar capable of working below 10,000 feet, and that the fire load would overwhelm civil defense within minutes. On the night of March 9, 1945, 334 B-29s hit Tokyo. The resulting firestorm killed approximately 100,000 people in 6 hours and burned 16 square miles of the city to ash. 14 B-29s didn't come back, a loss rate of 4.2%, lower than the 8th Air Force averaged over Germany in 1943. LeMay never talked much about that night afterward. The humidity on Tinian hit like a wet towel at 3 a.m. Ground crews loading the Enola Gay on August 5, 1945, worked bare-chested under floodlights, sweat pooling in their boot soles, hauling a 9,700-pound weapon into a bomb bay designed for incendiary clusters. The unit bomb, Little Boy, cost roughly $2 billion to develop through the Manhattan Project. The aircraft carrying it belonged to a program that cost $3 billion. $5 billion of American industrial capacity converging on a single hard stand on a coral island in the Pacific. Put those numbers against each other. The Manhattan Project, uranium enrichment at Oak Ridge, plutonium production at Hanford, the theoretical work at Los Alamos, 130,000 employees across 30 sites, ran $2 billion 1945 dollars. The B-29 program, from R-40B specification to the 3,970 airframes delivered by war's end, exceeded that by a full $1 billion. The delivery truck cost more than the bomb. A 1946 War Department accounting review sent to Congress noted that the B-29 program represented the single largest financial commitment to a weapons system in American history. The atomic bomb came second. Colonel Paul Tibbets flew the Enola Gay at 31,600 feet over Hiroshima on August 6th. The pressurization system Wells designed in 1940 held. The R-350s ran clean. By 1945, improved baffling and fuel injection had pushed the catastrophic failure rate down to something approaching manageable, though the records from the 509th Composite Group show 2 engine changes on Enola Gay in the week before the mission. The fire control system, the remote turrets, the analog computers, the central fire control station, none of it mattered. Tibbets carried a single weapon and needed only to reach the target and open the bomb bay doors. 3 days later, Boxcar dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki. Same aircraft type, same engines that burned their own bombers over Kansas and Chengdu and the Marianas, same pressurized tube that killed Edmund Allen over Seattle. By August 1945, 414 B-29s had been lost to all causes, combat, mechanical failure, accidents, the engines. Crews ditched in the Pacific and waited for submarines that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. The hum of four R-3350s at cruise power, a deep sustained vibration that flight engineers said they could feel in their teeth, followed some of those men for decades. Dutch Van Kirk, Enola Gay's navigator, gave an interview in 2005. He said he'd done the math once, years after the war. The fuel, the bombs, the aircraft, the training, the men they lost getting the B-29 to work. Asked if the cost justified what happened over Hiroshima, he said he thought about the men on Tinian more than the men on the ground. Then he stopped talking. His navigation logs sit in a glass case at the Smithsonian.